Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This file is being recorded for the August 2021 edition of Socialism for All, and it's an audiobook and discussion of Socialism and Anarchism from 1905 by Vladimir Lenin. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and consider supporting us on Patreon. There's a link to Patreon in the video description. So the last video that we put up on the channel was the similarly titled Anarchism and Socialism by Lenin from 1901. That is kind of a cursory document. It looks like a draft of notes that Lenin started. They're not as well fleshed out. This document, I feel like Lenin pulled out the old notes and fleshed them out in a particular situation, which was the denial of credentials to the anarchists in the newly formed Soviets after the 1905 First Russian Revolution, which didn't take power, but they established the first Soviets after that, and they started building power towards the 1917 Russian Revolution. So this was written on November 24, 1905, published in Novaya Jin, number 21, November 25, 1905, signed in Lenin, and published according to the newspaper text. The source is Lenin Collected Works, Progress Publishers, 1965, Moscow, Volume 10. Transcription and HTML markup by R. Simbala, and it's in the public domain at the Marxist Internet Archive, thanks as usual to Marxists.org. So before we get into the text, remember again, 1905, this was after the First Russian Revolution and the establishment of the first Soviets. Lenin, in this document, discusses the Soviets and their role and whether or not anarchists were welcome in them and why or why not. So here's the text. The Executive Committee of the Soviet of Workers' Deputies decided yesterday, November 23rd, to reject the application of the anarchists for representation on the Executive Committee and on the Soviet of Workers' Deputies. The Executive Committee itself has given the following reasons for this decision. Quote, 1. In the whole of international practice, congresses and socialist conferences have never included representatives of the anarchists, since they do not recognize the political struggle as a means for the achievement of their ideals. 2. Only parties can be represented, and the anarchists are not a party. Unquote. We consider the decision of the Executive Committee to be in the highest degree correct, and of enormous importance from the point of view both of principle and of practical politics. If we were to regard the Soviet of Workers' Deputies as a workers' parliament, or as an organ of proletarian self-government, then of course it would have been wrong to reject the application of the anarchists. However insignificant, fortunately, the influence of the anarchists among our workers may be, nevertheless, a certain number of workers undoubtedly support them. The question whether the anarchists constitute a party, an organization, a group, or a voluntary association of like-minded people is a formal question and not of major importance in terms of principle. Lastly, if the anarchists, while rejecting the political struggle, apply for representation in an institution which is conducting such a struggle, this crying inconsistency merely goes to show once again how utterly unstable are the philosophy and tactics of the anarchists. But of course, instability is no reason for excluding anyone from a parliament or an organ of self-government. We regard the decision of the Executive Committee as absolutely correct and in no way contradicting the functions, the character, and the composition of this body. The Soviet of Workers' Deputies is not a labor parliament, and not an organ of proletarian self-government, nor an organ of self-government at all, but a fighting organization for the achievement of definite aims. This fighting organization includes, on the basis of a temporary, unwritten fighting agreement, representatives of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, the Party of Proletarian Socialism, of the Socialist Revolutionary Party, the representatives of petty bourgeois socialism, or the extreme left wing of revolutionary bourgeois Democrats, and finally, many non-party workers. Just a quick comment there. We have seen these factions mentioned before in previous Lenin writings that we've done on the channel. So the RSDLP, Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, this was the party that had the Menshevik faction and the Bolshevik faction and later split, and the Bolsheviks took power in 1917. The Mensheviks were basically social democrats by today's standards. So in terms of the way that they behaved and the things that they believed, think of what we do on the channel with the hanging with the Sockdem gang, Kyle Kulinski, Humanist Report. people like that. The Socialist Revolutionary Party, the representatives of petty bourgeois socialism, as Lenin calls them, these to me sound more like the kind of bread tube radlibs who aren't a lot of times explicitly anarchist, but just kind of radical liberals. It's a hard thing to pin down. You could call them the non-revolutionary left, or in this case, Lenin was talking about the extreme left wing of revolutionary bourgeois Democrats. What does that mean? Well, Russia at this time was still a monarchy. They had capitalist elements running, but it was still governed by the Tsar. He wasn't deposed until 1917. And then there was a power vacuum for most of that year while these different factions fought over who was going to take power, and eventually the Bolsheviks won, thankfully, because the Mensheviks and the socialist revolutionaries, the Sokdems and Radlibs of their day, sided with the Cadet Party, which was the bourgeois party, which wanted to say, okay, we got rid of the Tsar, now we're going to just run Russia like any capitalist country and just have a bourgeois party. So when push came to shove, that's who they sided with. So Lenin is completely correct in referring to them as the extreme left wing of revolutionary, anti-monarchist, in other words, bourgeois Democrats. All right, hope that's clear. It's a lot to sort out, although on repeated passes with this material, you can kind of get it. Anyway, back to the anarchists. So the latter, however, non-party workers, are not non-party in general, but are non-party revolutionaries, their sympathies being entirely on the side of the revolution, workers' revolution, for the victory of which they are fighting with boundless enthusiasm, energy, and self-sacrifice. For that reason, it will be quite natural to include representatives of the revolutionary peasantry in the executive committee. For all practical purposes, the Soviet of Workers' Deputies is an inchoate, broad fighting alliance of socialists and revolutionary Democrats, the term non-party revolutionary, of course, representing a series of transitional stages between the former and the latter. Such an alliance is obviously necessary for the purpose of conducting political strikes and other more active forms of struggle for the urgent democratic demands which have been accepted and approved by the overwhelming majority of the population. Comment, meaning it is necessary because to do things like strikes and those forms of struggle, you need lots and lots of people. It's a numbers game. However, continuing, in an alliance of this sort, the anarchists will not be an asset, but a liability. They will merely bring disorganization, and thus weaken the force of the joint assault. To them it is still debatable whether political reform is urgent and important. The exclusion of anarchists from the fighting alliance, which is carrying out, as it were, our democratic revolution, is quite necessary from the point of view of this revolution, and is in its interests. There can be a place in a fighting alliance only for those who fight for the aim of that alliance. If, for example, the cadets or the Party of Law and Order, comment the more conservative party, had managed to recruit at least several hundred workers into their St. Petersburg branches, the Executive Committee of the Soviet of Workers' Deputies would hardly have opened its doors to the representatives of such organizations. Comment, such organizations meaning ones who are bourgeois in nature and not fighting for the aim of the alliance, workers' revolution. Continuing. In explaining its decision, the Executive Committee refers to the practice of international socialist congresses. We warmly welcome this statement, this recognition by the executive body of the St. Petersburg Soviet of Workers' Deputies of the ideological leadership of the international social democratic movement. The Russian Revolution has already acquired international significance. The enemies of the revolution in Russia are already conspiring with Wilhelm II and with all sorts of reactionaries, tyrants, militarists, and exploiters in Europe against free Russia. Neither shall we forget that the complete victory of our revolution demands an alliance of the revolutionary proletariat of Russia with the socialist workers of all countries. It is not for nothing that the international socialist congresses adopted the decision not to admit the anarchists. A wide gulf separates socialism from anarchism, and it is in vain that the agents provocateurs of the secret police and the newspaper lackeys of reactionary governments pretend that this gulf does not exist. That, I think, still has implications to this day. Continuing. The philosophy of the anarchists is bourgeois philosophy turned inside out. Their individualistic theories and their individualistic ideal are the very opposite of socialism. Their views express not the future of bourgeois society, which is striding with irresistible force toward the socialization of labor, but the present and even the past of that society, the domination of blind chance over the scattered and isolated small producer. Their tactics, which amount to a repudiation of the political struggle, disunite the proletarians and convert them, in fact, into passive participators in one bourgeois policy or another, since it is impossible and unrealizable for the workers really to dissociate themselves from politics. In the present Russian Revolution, the task of rallying the forces of the proletariat, of organizing it, of politically educating and training the working class, is more imperative than ever. The more outrageous the conduct of the Black Hundreds government, the more zealously its agents provocateurs strive to fan base passions among the ignorant masses, and the more desperately the defenders of the autocracy, which is rotting alive, clutch at every opportunity to discredit the revolution by organizing holdups, pogroms, and assassinations, and by fuddling lumpen proletarians with drink. The more important is the task of organization that falls primarily to the party of the socialist proletariat. And we shall therefore resort to every means of ideological struggle to keep the influence of the anarchists over the Russian workers just as negligible as it has been so far. That's the end of the audiobook. I hope that you have found this interesting and useful in helping to unpack some of what is going on in worker struggles today in the United States and beyond. Thanks for listening. Thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialismforall. You can sign up for as little as $2. All of those contributions are very encouraging. They're also materially very supportive, and I thank all of you for that. If you can't make a financial contribution, very understandable, and other ways to support the channel are liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting. Don't cost you a thing, just a little bit of your time. We appreciate it. It helps to get this channel in front of more people's eyeballs and to expand this conversation. Anywhere you can share it on Facebook is particularly appreciated, since S4A has been banned from Facebook several times. Just don't get banned yourself. We appreciate it. Thanks again for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video.